with this video, I'm going to talk about energy and photosynthesis in organisms. So I'm going to start with the energy piece, since this is kind of the overall theme for this. Energy in organisms, there's a couple key terms here that we need to understand. The first is chemical energy. That is energy stored in chemical bonds. So that's mostly in organic molecules like proteins, fats, lipids, carbohydrates. Now that chemical energy can be converted into a molecule that we call ATP, and that's in our cells, and that's used to power everything in our cells. Now where these two things come from, a couple different processes that can make these molecules. One is photosynthesis. It's one you're probably pretty familiar with, where your process of taking sunlight, converting it into energy, and actually that process converts it into chemical energy. The other one you may not be familiar with, which is chemiosynthesis, which is basically taking chemicals in the environment, converting them into energy. This is much less common than photosynthesis. So here's the overall process in terms of energy in an ecosystem. The first thing is the sun provides energy for all organisms. Without the sun, we wouldn't be able to survive because we wouldn't be able to make our own energy. Now what we get out of this process is cell energy. Now a couple things have to occur here. The first is the sun has to come in and hit the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts absorb the sunlight. They actually convert it into organic molecules and oxygen. Now organisms that do this are typically algae, plants, and then there's some bacteria that also do this. Now, once those organic molecules and oxygen get into the mitochondria in the cell, so these can coexist in the same cell, the mitochondria create carbon dioxide, water, and then they provide that ATP cell energy. So there's a couple steps that we have to go through in order to get cellular energy in the form of ATP. For mitochondria, almost all organisms have mitochondria, but animals and plants are the two that we typically talk about having a lot of those. So here's the photosynthesis process. If you take a leaf and you zoom in on it and you look at one plant cell within that leaf, and there's millions of cells there. If you look at the plant cell, here's the nucleus in the black, and then there's this small green disc. That is the chloroplast. The chloroplast, that's the place where sunlight's going to get absorbed. So if we break down the chloroplast, there's a bunch of little discs inside the chloroplast. So if we zoom in on a stack of those discs here, we get what we call a thylakoid. Those are disc-like membrane, very, very small disc-like membrane material, and those absorb the sunlight. Now within the thylakoid, there is chlorophyll, which is the actual pigment that absorbs sunlight. It's a green pigment. And then there's carotenoids, which is a yellow, red, orange pigment. And these are what, when the leaves change color, that's kind of what you're seeing, is these pigments that are more dominant at that point. We'll talk about that later. And so here's the overall process for photosynthesis. This is the chemical reaction that you're going to need to know. There's two things that react together in photosynthesis. The one is plants take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the air. They also take water that can come from the air or come from the ground that they pull in through their roots. Now they need 6 of each of those molecules. They use some sunlight, which is the energy source that basically powers the change in the molecule. So they change this carbon dioxide and water into glucose, which we know is a sugar, which can be used in our cells to provide energy. So they can make 1 glucose molecule out of that, and then they also make 6 oxygen molecules as a byproduct. Now plants don't need oxygen, so they just expel the oxygen into the air, which then we breathe in. Plants actually make many different types of carbohydrates, not just glucose. Okay, this is the process that we're going to focus on, but understand that there's many types of carbohydrates that the plants make through this process. So this is the overall reaction again, 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters. You need some sunlight to make a glucose and some oxygen. That concludes this video, so make sure you go on and take the quiz.